I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Close the door behind you and listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is something I've never told anyone. Not my therapist, not my family, not the police. For 3 years, someone lived inside the walls of my house. He watched me sleep. He watched me eat. He watched me cry. And the worst part? He was never supposed to leave. I moved into the house on Mercer Street in October of 2019. It was cheap, too cheap. A 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood for $650 a month. The landlord, a quiet older man named Gerald, told me the previous tenant had moved away suddenly. He didn't make eye contact when he said it. I should have asked more questions. But I was 24, recently divorced, and desperately needed a fresh start. So I signed the lease that same afternoon and drove back to collect my boxes. The house was old, built in the 1940s, the kind of place with thick walls, creaky floors, and a basement that smelled like wet concrete, and something else I couldn't quite name. I told myself I liked the character. I told myself the sounds were just the house settling. I told myself a lot of things that year. It started with food. About 3 weeks after I moved in, I noticed food going missing. Not in an obvious way, not like someone had raided my fridge. It was subtle. Half a loaf of bread one week, a few apples the next, a jar of peanut butter that I was sure was full on Monday, nearly empty by Thursday. I blamed myself. I thought I was stress eating and not remembering. Then one night in November, I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, right above my head. I lay completely still, my heart pounding so loud, I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour. The footsteps stopped. I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a possum. I set traps in the attic the next morning. None of them were ever triggered. But the footsteps kept coming. By January, the sounds had changed. The footsteps were still there, but now there was something new. A scratching sound, low and rhythmic, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It would start around midnight and continue for hours. Sometimes it came from the walls in my bedroom, sometimes from inside the closet. I called a pest control company. They came, inspected the house from top to bottom, and found nothing. No rodents, no insects, no signs of any animal activity whatsoever. "Your house is clean," the technician told me, looking almost confused. "Whatever you're hearing, it's not coming from any animal we know." I didn't sleep properly for 2 weeks after that. I started leaving the TV on all night, just to drown out the silence. And then, I found the hole. It was behind my bedroom dresser. A small, perfectly circular hole in the wall, roughly the size of a fist, partially hidden behind a framed picture that had been there since I moved in. I never had a reason to move the dresser before. The hole was dark, and when I leaned close and looked inside, I could have sworn I saw something blink. I ordered a small wireless camera from Amazon that same night. I didn't tell anyone. I think part of me genuinely believed I was losing my mind. I set the camera up in the hallway, pointed toward the living room, and connected it to my phone. For 4 days, nothing happened. On the 5th night, at 3:11 a.m., the camera picked up movement. A shadow, thin and tall, moving silently from the direction of the kitchen toward the hallway. It paused at the entrance to the hallway for exactly 11 seconds. Then it retreated back into the darkness. I watched the footage 17 times. It was a man, thin, wearing dark clothing, moving with the slow, practiced patience of someone who had done this many, many times before. He knew the layout of my house better than I did. I called the police that morning. 2 officers came, walked through the house, checked the doors and windows, all locked from the inside. They found nothing. They left within 30 minutes. I was alone again. That evening, I sat in the middle of my living room floor with a flashlight and began tapping on every wall in the house. And that's when I discovered it. Behind the kitchen pantry, there was a wall that sounded hollow. Not slightly hollow, completely hollow, like tapping on an empty drum. I pulled the pantry shelf away from the wall. Behind it was a door. Small, narrow, painted over so many times it had nearly disappeared into the wall. But it was there. A handle, hinges, a latch that had been recently oiled. My hands were shaking as I pulled it open. Inside was a space, roughly 4 feet wide and 12 feet long, running along the back of the kitchen and into the wall behind the living room. It was dark, but not empty. There was a sleeping bag, a small battery-powered lantern, several empty food cans, a stack of paperback books, a bucket in the corner that I didn't look at for too long. And on the wall, scratched deep into the plaster, in small, careful letters, were dates. Hundreds of dates, going back almost 3 years. The earliest one was 6 months before I had even moved in. I went straight to Gerald. When I knocked on his door, he answered almost immediately, like he'd been expecting me. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. "I should have told you," he said quietly. "I thought he was gone. I truly thought he was gone." His name was Raymond, Gerald's younger brother. He had been diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia in his late 20s and had spent years in and out of institutions. Gerald had built the hidden space in the wall years ago, just to give him somewhere safe, he said, his voice breaking. Raymond had lived in the walls, on and off, for almost a decade. Previous tenants had complained about sounds, about missing food. One woman had broken her lease after only 2 months, claiming the house was haunted. Gerald had rented the house out again and again, quietly hoping that Raymond had finally moved on. He never did. The police found Raymond 3 days later. He hadn't gone far. He was living in the crawlspace beneath the house, accessible through a hatch, hidden under the carpet, in the basement. When they brought him out, he was disoriented, malnourished, but physically unharmed. He looked at me as they led him past, and in a quiet, completely calm voice, he said, "I liked watching you. You reminded me of my daughter." Raymond didn't have a daughter. I moved out that same week. Gerald was charged with unlawful concealment and several other violations. Raymond was placed back into psychiatric care. I've since moved to a different city. I have motion sensors in every room. I sleep with the lights on. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I still hear footsteps. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want you to do one thing for me. Go check behind your furniture. Check the walls that sound a little too hollow. Check the spaces you've never thought to look. Because sometimes, the things we're most afraid of aren't hiding under our beds. They're hiding in the spaces we forgot existed. Sleep well, if you can.